Assalamu alaikum, greetings of peace. My name is Hafsa Siddiqui and I'm your host for YATA Talks. Today in the studio again with us is Brother Sadat to talk to us about what his life was like growing up in a Western country as a young Muslim man. So thank you so much for being here. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
So just once again, for our viewers who haven't seen you before, tell us a little bit about yourself and what it is you do.
I'm an irregular member of Muslim Debate Initiative, which is a small organization based in London, England, which people can look up at MDI, Muslim Debate Initiative. I volunteer at Street Dawah Toronto, where we do Muslim outreach. We give out free literature on Islam at Dundas Square, which is at Yonge and Dundas. We do that on Sundays. And I'm also a volunteer at Tariq Islamic Center here in Toronto.
Alrighty, so this is kind of a segment where I'm just going to ask you to tell me a bit about yourself and how your experience was growing up as a young man in the Western world and how you balanced being Muslim and growing up in the West. So tell me a little bit about your background and where your family is from and what country you grew up in.
Yeah, so my parents immigrated to Canada from Pakistan, but they spent most of their lives here in Canada because my father came in 1964 when he was in his 20s. And then my mother came in 1969 or 1970. I was born in 76. So I was born and raised here. And that's something I really like to mention and share with young Muslim youth when I meet them, because I think it's very important for this generation of Muslim youth to know that they're not the first ones going through this process. They might think in their families, they might be the first ones going through this process. But there have been others of us who have already gone through the entire elementary, junior high, high school, university system. We were born and raised here. And alhamdulillah, by the grace of God, we're still here. We're still spiritually here. We're spiritually intact. We're still practicing the deen. We're Muslim and we're proud. We're still practicing the religion. So I think it's very important for Muslim youth to know that.
Okay, so you talk about how you feel it's important to be spiritually intact. So how do you think you came into this kind of whirlwind culture and you were born into this culture? So how did you kind of find a way to balance yourself as a young Pakistani man and a young Canadian man of both cultures and then also balance your religion?
Yeah, well, I mean, there were ups and downs. And to be very frank with you, like in high school, I wasn't exactly a practicing Muslim. In some ways, our standards were lower at that time. I was a McDonald's kid. I was raised on McDonald's. And that sounds terrible today because you're like, what? That's not halal beef and everything. But I can tell you, most Pakistani families here in the 1980s were eating at McDonald's, were eating at KFC, because we just didn't have very many options. And probably we compromised on some things that we shouldn't have compromised on. And now we're changing. Now our family culture is changing because now you just have halal food and halal restaurants everywhere. You know what I'm saying? So there were lots of ups and downs. Our standards were lower. And so, yeah, I wasn't praying in high school, but that was just the typical Muslim high school student back in the 80s, you know. But now in Mississauga, I think it's much easier for those who are watching the video and don't know. Mississauga is a suburb of Toronto. And there's a high Muslim population here. So I'm sure there's Muslim kids who are praying and doing things like that. But we didn't have as many examples to look at back then. Yeah.
So there's always pros and cons to everything. So what would you say were kind of the pros of growing up in the Western world as a young Muslim man?
Well, the pros were that if you go through the secular schooling system and if you do come out religiously intact and you still have your deen and the uncertainty hasn't killed your iman, then you come out much stronger and you're really ready to tackle the mainstream society because you've already seen it before, you've already heard it before, you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So you do get an opportunity to kind of step back and critically look at your own faith because you're constantly being asked questions, which you wouldn't be asked if you were being raised in Pakistan or if you're in high school in Mecca. No one's going to be asking you these questions. But if you're in high school in Toronto, I had friends asking me, like, Sadat, you don't date. How are you going to get married if you don't date? And the funny thing is all those guys still aren't married. All those non-Muslim guys aren't married because dating, far from being something that facilitates marriage, especially the way dating is done now, it's actually a stumbling block to marriage. Mm-hmm. So my two of my closest friends who are non-Muslim are still unmarried. And it's my Muslim friends who are all married, you know, because marriage is something we do, you know. So, yeah.
So you feel that it kind of made you stronger as a Muslim coming out of it. And so what would you say some of the cons were, some of the ways that you felt you kind of were at a disadvantage growing up in a non-Muslim country?
Well, definitely. I mean, prayers are important and prayers become obligatory once you've reached, age of understanding and especially when you've reached puberty and everything. So those kind of amenities and facilities weren't, available to us in the way that they are now. Now people are more aware in Canada that, Muslims have to pray, and Muslim women are supposed to wear hijab and things like that. In my high school, York Memorial, I remember there being about 5 girls who wore hijab. I'm willing to bet there's probably 5 girls in each one of your classes now, probably, that wear hijab. In my entire high school, there were probably 5 girls that wore hijab. So, yeah, Islam was more dormant back then, and that made us maybe a bit less confident, than we were now. But there were advantages as well too, because we weren't exposed to this internet and social media thing, which is coming now. So there were less hijabs, but in some ways there was sometimes more decency and modesty back then, to be honest with you. Now we have, and I'm going to be harsh here, but now we have a lot of young females who wear hijabs, but on their Facebook profiles, there's all kind of profane language, vulgar jokes, photographs with their male platonic friends. And I'm thinking like, okay, that the hijab is supposed to mean a whole lot more than that.
So would you feel that ever that you kind of felt like an outsider growing up as someone who wasn't the majority, growing up in groups of people that you said you didn't have a lot of Muslim friends and most of your friends were kind of different than you. So did you ever feel like an outsider?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, there's definitely times, you feel very left out, even from a very small age, even in grade 1 and grade 2, when we'd have a pizza party and I'm one of 3 kids who can't eat the pepperoni, and the other one is like a Hindu or a Jain or something like that. So there are times you feel like an outsider, but in the long run, I actually believe all of those things worked out in a positive way for me, because it like I said, if you come out spiritually intact, and that is a big if, because there's a lot of spiritual casualties along the way as well, who will lose their identity, who will just become assimilated into the mainstream. But if you come out spiritually intact, you develop a bit of spine and a bit of confidence, and you're ready to stand up. You're ready to stand up against things that you don't agree with. Because I'm used to doing it since I was in grade 2. I'm used to it since in grade 2. No, I can't eat that lard in those cookies because it's against my religion. So now as an adult, I think that's translated into my adulthood too.
Alrighty, so it's been a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for speaking with us. Just really quickly, if you could give a message, particularly to young men who are feeling as if they're kind of outsiders in the sense. So just a quick message.
Yes, to my young Muslim brothers, be confident of who you are, be courageous and don't be cowardly. Stick to your deen. We have a beautiful religion, a beautiful way of life. Use these dark hairs that you have of your youth and use this youthful energy that you have now for the deen. Because with all due respect to the elders, it just doesn't count for as much. When you're 70 years old, you can't go night clubbing anyways. You're going to have a bad back. If not a bad back, you've got bad knees. You can't dance anymore. When you're 70 years old, you can't have a girlfriend anyways. You can't join a gang anyways. So at 70 years old, there's nothing left for you to do except to pray and to wait and die. But right now in your youth, you can use this useful energy. You can use your dark hairs. You can use this in the cause of the deen, in the cause of Islam, to worship Allah. And don't just save your white hairs and your leftovers for the religion. Give Allah some of your best right now.
Well, thank you so much. If you're interested in getting in contact with Brother Sadat, please click links below. Keep sending us your questions. I'm your host, Hafsa Siddiqui for YATA Talks.